In August 1960, in the city of Moscow, the president of the Soviet Union was seen giving a speech and saying that he was sure that by using nuclear missiles, the Soviet Union would definitely be able to defeat the United States. That year were the years of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. After the speech finished, when everyone clapped their hands, one man looked like he was smiling, but he was actually in a dilemma. He is Oleg Penkovsky. The next day at the office, Penkovsky kept thinking about the Soviet Union's plan to start a nuclear missile attack. If there is no action taken, this might lead to another world war. Penkovsky then planned to divulge this confidential information to the United States, so that very night after writing a letter, Penkovsky immediately looked for American citizens living in the Soviet Union and then asked for help to deliver the important letter to the US Embassy. A few days later, after the letter was sent, the CIA sent a female agent named Emily to go to the city of London to work with the British intelligence service. When Emily showed a letter from Penkovsky, the British intelligence leader was willing to help. He then ordered his assistant named Franks to send people to the Soviet Union who could arrange a meeting with Penkovsky. The next day at a restaurant, Franks invited Emily to meet her friend named Graville Wynne. There, Franks asked Wynne for help to go to the Soviet Union. Since Wynne was an ordinary businessman, Franks believed he would definitely not be suspected. Hearing that, Wynne refused and instead asked Franks to recruit a more experienced agent rather than him. Emily then tried to convince him that this mission was very easy, as he only needed to arrange a meeting with Penkovsky. After being persuaded by both Franks and Emily, Wynne was finally willing to help. Emily then gave him a tie clip, which must be used by Wynne as a sign for the US representative, and the next day, Wynne left for Moscow. The next day, Wynne met Penkovsky and other Soviet Union businessmen. Seeing the pin on Wynne's tie, Penkovsky smiled in relief. After the meeting, Penkovsky had lunch with Wynne to familiarize themselves, and in the evening, they watched the theater together like ordinary citizens. Later, on the way home, when things started to get quiet, then Penkovsky began to discuss their plans. He said so that there would be no suspicion. Wynne had to invite the Soviet Union businessmen they met earlier this afternoon, including Penkovsky, to visit England. Wynne also had to show that his business really existed. Only then, when all the businessmen slept in their hotel rooms, then Penkovsky could secretly meet Emily and Franks. The next day, according to the plan, Wynne, along with the Soviet Union businessmen and Penkovsky, went to England. In the evening, when everyone entered the hotel room, Wynne came to pick up Penkovsky and then escorted him to meet Franks and Emily. When they finally met, Emily asked why Penkovsky wanted to betray his own country. Penkovsky calmly replied that he just wanted to maintain the peace that had been achieved and didn't care if he was considered a traitor to his own country. For him, another world war would be really terrible and the world had had enough war, but before telling his country's secrets, Penkovsky asked for a condition that he wanted his family to be given protection if one day he was caught. He also asked that his secret information be used for peace, not for weapons against the Soviet Union. Hearing that condition, Emily agreed. The next day in a restaurant, Franks and Emily asked Wynne to continue the mission again. In the next mission, Wynne will disguise himself as a businessman as well as a courier. Later, Penkovsky will provide a confidential document, then Wynne will deliver the document to England, but Wynne refused because according to the initial agreement after yesterday's mission was completed, the task was completed. Moreover, he didn't want to risk his life because if one day he was found out, he will definitely be executed. Emily then told him that this was not her idea but Penkovsky's idea. At night, Wynne then met Penkovsky, who was still in England. Penkovsky explained that Wynne's character, who was just an ordinary businessman, was perfect for carrying out this mission. If Wynne was found out, he only needs to say that he is just a courier helping Penkovsky send documents to England without knowing what was in them, but even though Wynne had been explained, he was still not sure. The real reason he refused was because he had cheated on his wife before, and he had promised never to lie to his beloved wife again. Seeing Wynne's worries, Penkovsky tried to encourage him. He said sometimes a small lie can save the world. Hearing that, Wynne was finally convinced to help. Penkovsky then explained the detail of the mission. So as not to be suspected, Penkovsky would deliberately report every move that Wynne did to the government so the government would not find out about their mission. During his time in Moscow, Wynne also had to be careful and never trust anyone, including the hotel guard. If one item in the room shifts just a little, it's a sign that his room had been searched. Whenever Penkovsky got new information, he will secretly convey it to Wynne. The next day, the mission finally started. After receiving strong evidence that the Soviet Union was really planning to use nuclear missiles, Emily reported this to her superiors, who then ordered her to immediately form a special team. On the other hand, after coming back and forth from Moscow, with a heavy heart, Wynne told his wife, whose name was Sheila, that by next month they had to move to Moscow so that it would be easier to take care of business. Hearing her husband's sudden decision, Sheila was surprised, but as a wife, she can only obey. Day after day, Wynn and Penkovsky's mission went smoothly. The more times they meet, the more the two of them became closer. One day, when the Wynn family was having fun on vacation, suddenly Wynn scolded his son just because he forgot to bring a raincoat. Seeing her husband's attitude, Sheila felt like something was strange. At night, Sheila asked why this afternoon her husband scolded their son even though so far Wynn had never been angry. At that moment, Wynn really wanted to talk about everything. The heavy mission he was carrying on unknowingly changed his character, but Wynn chose to apologize and keep it a secret. The next day, Sheila told her friend about her husband's attitude lately, which looked strange. She was afraid that her husband was having an affair in Moscow. Meanwhile, when Wynn was on his way home, Penkovsky confided that if this mission ended, he wanted to bring his family to move to the United States. He jokingly said that he might become a cowboy later. While laughing, Wynn jokingly said that he might end up visiting the US quite often later. The next night, two Soviet Union spies were confused as to why secret state information was being leaked to the US. They suspected one of them was betraying the country because the information was known only by a few of the country's high ranks. A few days later, in a cabinet meeting, the president of the Soviet Union announced that he had collaborated to hide dozens of their nuclear missiles in the cities of Cuba, so if America messed with them again, he would immediately fire the missiles. After that meeting, Penkovsky immediately looked for information about the location of the missiles. After receiving the information from Penkovsky, when Wynn just entered his hotel room, he was surprised to see one of the books on the table was upside down. Meanwhile, in Penkovsky's office, a colleague and Soviet Union spy named Gribanow came and asked if there was any suspicious movement from Wynn. Gribanow suspected Wynn was an American spy. Hearing that question, Penkovsky tried to keep calm and said that he would try to keep an eye on Wynn. 2 days later, after returning to England, Wynn met Emily and Franks at a restaurant. He told them about the book that was turned upside down yesterday. He was sure that the room must be searched by someone and that he was now under suspicion. For the safety of Wynn, Franks banned him from going back to the Soviet Union again. Later, he would tell Penkovsky to immediately leave the Soviet Union too. When Wynn left, Emily asked how to tell Penkovsky because they couldn't go to the Soviet Union without the help of Wynn. With a soft tone, Franks explained that there was no way to save Penkovsky. Sooner or later, Penkovsky will definitely be arrested. At night, Wynn was shocked to see news about President John F. Kennedy, who said that he already knew about the plan between the Soviet Union and Cuba. The president threatened if the Soviet Union did not withdraw its nuclear missiles, he did not hesitate to fight. On the other side, Penkovsky and high-ranking Soviet Union officials also witnessed the news. The next day at a cabinet meeting, one of the ministers approached and told Penkovsky not to join the meeting again, and without asking too many questions, he accepted the decision. When he returned home, he panicked and immediately checked the drawer where he hid the camera he used to take pictures of the confidential documents. Even though everything was still there, Penkovsky was still worried that he might have been found out. In England, when Wynn met Emily and Franks again, Wynn said that because of the news last night, he was sure that the Soviet Union government was now looking for the mastermind behind the leaking information, and in the near future, Penkovsky will definitely be caught. Wynn begged Franks to save his friend immediately, but Franks couldn't do anything in such a heated political situation. He couldn't possibly enter the Soviet Union at that moment. Seeing Franks' pessimistic attitude, Wynn was disappointed and firmly said that he would help because he still had to take care of some business in the Soviet Union, so he might still be allowed to go in there. Wynn didn't care even if he had to die. The important thing was that his best friend could be safe. Emily was touched and finally wanted to help smuggle Penkovsky and his family out of the Soviet Union. That afternoon at home, when Wynn was getting ready, his wife approached him. Since that day when Wynn got angry at his son, their relationship began to fall apart. Sheila was irritated and said that she already knew about Wynn's affair in Moscow. She told him not to return home if he still wanted to go. Wynn couldn't say a word in defense and chose to leave. As soon as Wynn arrived in Moscow, he immediately took Penkovsky to his hotel room. There, Penkovsky turned a radio loudly so nobody could hear their conversation. Penkovsky was disappointed with what the United States had done by threatening the Soviet Union with the information he provided for them, even though from the beginning, they had agreed that all the information would be used for peace. Wynn tried to calm him down. He told Penkovsky that he and Emily had made an escape plan for Penkovsky and his family. The next day, Emily entered the Soviet Union using a fake ID. She then asked the American embassy to help Penkovsky escape. Later, Penkovsky would take Wynn to the airport and then return home as usual, and when the situation felt safe, then Emily would come out of the embassy office and pick up Penkovsky's family by car. That night when Penkovsky met Wynn, he was given a pack of cigarettes. In it was the photo of a car that would pick up his family. The two of them then went to watch the theater as usual. During the show, Win could only hold his tears as he thought that this would be the last time he will be able to watch the theater with his best friend. The next day, the plan began. Penkovsky took Win to the airport. At first, everything went smoothly, but on the other hand, when Emily had just left the American embassy, she was followed by Soviet spies. Their plan failed miserably. Emily and Win were caught. Meanwhile, when Penkovsky just got home, he was shocked to find Gribanov and some police officers waiting for him. Gribanov said he already knew everything, and then ordered the officers to take Penkovsky to prison. On the other hand, during interrogation, Win tried to explain that he was just a courier and had nothing to do with Penkovsky, but his efforts were in vain. The police chief did not want to listen to Win's reason. His hair was shaved, then he was put in prison. That night, in front of the American embassy, a high-ranking Soviet Union met Emily and told him that from this moment on, Emily was deported from the Soviet Union, and if within 24 hours she still hadn't left, she will be jailed too. The next day, after arriving in London, Emily immediately met Franks. Emily told him everything that happened yesterday. Franks tried to calm down while saying that he would try to help solve this problem. The two of them then went to Win's house. After hearing the whole story, Sheila was shocked after knowing that her husband risked his life saving the world from war while she suspected her husband of having an affair. As so Emily could talk freely, Franks took Win's son out. Emily then explained that Emily was the only one who was able to help Win. Sheila must help ensure the Soviet Union that Win was just an ordinary businessman who had been used. Hearing that, Sheila answered that she would do anything in order to save her husband. Meanwhile, in prison, Gribanov came to meet Win. Gribanov said that Penkovsky had told him everything. So now Win only needed to be honest so his sentence could be commuted, but somehow. Win kept telling him that he was just a courier ordered by Penkovsky to deliver goods without knowing anything. So that Win would want to confess. He was tortured for days. Day after day, Win continued to undergo torture after torture, until one day, Gribanov offered Win that he could eat well as long as he signed a statement claiming to be a spy. But even though his condition was very weak, Win firmly refused because he still didn't want to give up. The torture continued. Loud voices were made so Win couldn't sleep, his mattress was taken away, and he was beaten black and blue. Every time Win's body started to weaken, Gribanov would immediately come and ask the same question. Luckily, no matter how weak his condition was, Win's answer was never changed. 6 months later, after all this time, for the first time while in prison, Win was finally allowed to meet his beloved wife. Seeing the condition of her husband, who was very thin, Sheila was sad. She apologized for taking so long before she could meet him. All this time, the Soviet Union forbade her to come, but last month, after the Soviet Union withdrew all the nuclear missiles from Cuban territory, only then was she allowed to visit. Hearing the news, Win was touched that his mission to stop the war had been successful. So he was not suspected. While crying, he tried to divert the topic and asked his wife to tell him about the condition of their son. The next day, Gribanov met Win again. Gribanov said that he would bring Penkovsky so the two could talk for one last time before being sentenced to death. Not long after, Penkovsky came in. To see that his best friend's condition was much worse than his, Win was shocked. Penkovsky then apologized for involving him in the mission. The only reason he did all that was only that he wanted their children and grandchildren to be able to live in peace without a war like before, but sadly, he failed. Hearing that from Penkovsky, Win held his best friend's hand. While holding back his tears, Win told the news to Penkovsky that the Soviet Union had withdrawn all the missiles from Cuba, which means that all their struggles were successful. They both won. A year later, after going through a long process, the British government finally managed to bring Win back to London. Arriving at the front of the house, the journalists were seen waiting for him, but due to fatigue, Win could not answer their questions and immediately entered. As soon as he entered the house, Win immediately remembered the good memories with Penkovsky, the memories of his struggle to maintain world peace with a friend he would never be able to meet again.